And yes, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. You know that financial services have undergone a substantial amount of regulation. There were stricter rules, of course, after the crash, the financial crisis, 2007, 2008. There's a second payment services directive, which also sort of falls in line with more consumer protection, while at the same time boosting competition. Quite a balancing act again. And politics certainly have quite an impact on the kind digital financial services is developing and the kind of development room there is, whether it's in Germany, in Europe, or the global financial ecosystem, of course. And I'm very happy now, and I know that Fabian is very happy. He mentioned already that this is one of the highlights of the day for him. He's looking forward to it, so hopefully we won't let him down. Let's welcome now Dr. Joerg Kukies, State Secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Finance and representing the financial services sector, because obviously Joerg Kukies represents here the political arena. We welcome finleap founder and CEO Ramin Niroumand. So it's very good to have both of you on board. And I've been told before this conference, before we went on air, that Monica, you don't basically, you hardly have to do anything, because the two of them, they will just basically, once they get started, the only thing that I have to do is to be the referee and maybe stop you and make sure that you're not both talking at the same time. But let me then just basically kick it off. I mean, we were just listening to Burkhard Balz. Perhaps if you were listening to his excursions here, if you would like to start with just briefly responding to the most important points, maybe State Secretary Joerg Kukies, maybe you would like to start off with.
Well, unfortunately, I was in another meeting, so I didn't have the chance to listen. But given that I interact so much with Burkhard, I can guess what he was saying. And I think, I mean, one of the key things that we're working on together with Deutsche Bundesbank is, of course, the whole question of how do we digitize our currency, and what do we need to take into account in the movement into the space of digital central bank currencies. For us, we had an extremely interesting interaction together with Bundesbank, our financial sector, and our IT sector and technology companies on the question of, let's not stay with CBDC 1.0, but already think about CBDC 2.0 and already think about what can we do to make the central bank digital currency that we're thinking about programmable, because one of the things that all of our technology experts in the producing economy, as well as our financial industry, said is in the Internet of Things and where we're headed towards smart contracts with real-world industrial applications, having a programmable currency could be extremely beneficial from a competitiveness of the Eurozone perspective to really drive the things forward. The other thing that we are working together extremely closely with Burkhard and the team at the Bundesbank and Fabio Panetta at the ECB is, of course, the project of the European Payments Initiative, EPI, which has the potential to really revolutionize payments in Europe, because we really are convinced that Europe has a competitive advantage here. The SEPA system, the Target 2 system, instant payments is something where Europe really has an edge, and we should be able to leverage that by making sure that our financial industry participates in that as well.
So, Ramin, how much of an edge does Europe have there? I mean, you operate in this environment.
Yeah, so first of all, I think to have an edge right now, we still have to do a lot of stuff, right? The SEPA initiative was also well thought and very bad executed when you think about not the rails, which work, right? The SEPA rails work. But if you cannot use a German SEPA account in Italy or France to buy something or to get an electricity contract, then it's actually not working. So this is, I think, the common problem sometimes between theory and practice and execution in the end. I'm sure, and Joerg knows a lot about a lot of these problems when then it comes to reality. And I think that is what we need to work on, right? I think the ideas, the concepts are there. I just can highly welcome the initiative about the European ID or the European wallet ID, which was just announced, which is a big win. And I actually was writing 2 years ago about this initiative because it could help on so many fronts, right? It could help on fronts like AML, for example, and save the European banking system hundreds of millions or probably billions even in cost. It would make services so much smoother, and it would really differentiate the European Union as a powerful economy then to act under one market, because ID is the beginning of everything, especially in the digital world. And then we would have a 450 million euro or 400 people plus society you can roll out the services to. But I think the problem we really need to not get shocked too easy when something happens on the way, and really need to follow this way of a strong European technology base and really execute it to the end. And one thing I want to check on you, Joerg, I got from the team today, that's something where we were heading above, and we were really proud that Germany, when it came to something like the crypto license, where we really made a move in the direction of innovation, and where we really tried to go ahead the curve to regulate something which weren't really clearly regulated. And everyone highly appreciated it. One of the firms we started, Solaris Bank, also applied for that, and I think many others did. Now, the team informed me there's something like the travel rule coming up, which a lot of people in the scene are very concerned about, that the travel rule might again hinder some of the innovation we were having. And I think the scene is clearly willing to work with you, with the European Commission on better ruling and on better solutions. But a rule, it feels like a little bit, which is not really working. And in a nutshell, I can describe it. I think every transaction then has to be completely labeled, and it's also maybe the whole decentralized idea behind the crypto world goes a little bit off then. I'm not saying that we should foster more AML. I think there needs to be other ways and modern ways like chain analytics services and so on and so forth. But our team at least is a little bit concerned that the travel rule again would hinder innovation we just got into and we just started, and a scene which is quite young and I think still economically not that relevant, that a new rule which no one really know where it's coming from, or where I think only 2 weeks of consultation was given. The scene is quite afraid of it. Maybe what's your view on the travel ruling and the effects on the scene to it? I mean, you're the expert, clearly.
So, more broadly, first of all, I think it is indeed too early to give you specifics because it's still in discussion. So I think we should await the consultation. I think the eternal trade-off that we have between things like efficiency and AML and security, I think that's always going to be a difficult trade-off. But we're definitely keen to understand the industry's concerns, and as you know, we've made adjustments to a lot of our legislation as a result of our consultations. So I think that one, I don't think we really are at a conclusion stage yet, and we're still open for discussion and open for debate. On EID, I think that I agree with you that is a huge opportunity at the European level, and there was very little focus and very little reporting, surprisingly, on a decision that we made in the German Bundestag just this week, where we essentially gave the go-ahead and the green light to a big project that we're planning for EID in Germany that will be in sync with the European rule, where we basically allow you to store your identification card, your driver's license, your credit cards, and all verified and verifiable documents at very high security standards that hopefully will all ascribe to the required AML standards, so that you can essentially greatly simplified things like bank account setup, things like checking out at car reservations, checking into hotels. We essentially want to make all of that a purely wallet-based approach where everything is straight through processed.
And that would be for Germany only, or is that something you can see on a European scale?
Well, the big difference still at European level is you can pass national legislation on things like that within weeks. At the European level, it takes a bit longer. So what we did was we waited with the German legislation until we knew how the European legislation is likely to look, and basically said, all of these things, of course, we need to keep upward compatible so that we don't do anything nationally now that will sort of ring fence us or make Europeanization difficult. So we're convinced that through the technical implementation that we chose, namely we passed a law but gave the ministries the authorization to make implementing acts very quickly, that will allow us to just front load the whole process. And we're hoping that we'll be able to establish these standards in the course of this year, and allow all of these things to start at the trial phase as soon as the end of this year.
So how do we ensure that not another SEPA happens? Because then the whole idea of a European idea would be vanish a little bit, right?
Yeah, but that then is a question of the European EID process, right? And I think, as you mentioned, on the 3rd of June, the European Commission announced, at least our experts are convinced, a blueprint that will allow us to avoid any kind of fragmentation, because we're basically saying, and Europe is saying, every member state needs to implement a compatible EID system that will be transferable between member states, and every member state doesn't have the right to do it anymore. It has the obligation to do it anymore, and that I think makes a huge difference. And that, given the use cases, I think everyone agrees that it needs to be a European project, not a national project.
Can you plan with that? Ramin, when you listen to that, how helpful is this for you to plan your business?
I mean, SEPA was an obligation. SEPA is a super standard. It just has one use case and it's not working. So this is the problem, right? And I love this project to happen, and I think maybe but I don't. So execution is always difficult, and I understand that execution above 26 different or 27 different countries is even more difficult. What I would wish from a country like Germany, with the power and obviously also the technology we now have, when you just see all the technology startups we bring out, then we should also be able to do a wallet. Maybe not with the same guys who did the Corona one, but maybe in a different setup. But we can then, why cannot Germany then roll it out for all the other countries the same standard? Or why can we not push as Germany the UE to roll it out in more standard? Yeah, and
very important nuance. We definitely don't have the power to impose anything on anyone, but we can push, right? But that's that's the eternal conflict, and that's the eternal magic of Europe, that it just takes much longer because we are it goes back to big picture politics. It's a massive difference if you have national sovereignty at the European level, which we have, versus at the US level, right? I mean, if Congress decides something, it becomes law in every 50 states pretty quickly. Whereas if Europe decides something, there's always this inherent conflict that we haven't ceded as nearly as much sovereignty to the European level as the American states have ceded to their union level. And I think that's what a lot of these things come down to, right? And you can see it with SEPA, you can see it with the banking union, the capital markets union, the digital union now, that this process always comes down to member states being reluctant to relinquish sovereignty at the end of the day. That's what it comes down to.
Is there somewhere too much harmonization? Because you just mentioned, the capital market union, and I mean, there are several projects that have already been agreed upon on the European scale. And we had panel discussion yesterday where it was about a digitized Europe and what the prospects are, certainly in comparison to the United States and to Asia. And we were told by a representative who from a Hong Kong-based company or a China-based company that it's basically you never quite know where you're at when you're trying to do business or partner with fintechs and the digital financial services in Europe, because it's this country has these rules, the other one has those rules, so that there is no unified Europe on that level. But there is in some way. So where would you say harmonization is going too far? Where would you have rather less? I mean, Ramin, would you be better off if everything was basically decided, let's say, by Brussels? Or is it good to have slightly national differences?
Right now, I cannot imagine of a national difference where it would be to an advantage. I mean, in some cases, when, let's say, a country is more innovating and pushes this innovation, for example, which comes down to the eKYC, down to the whole European area, then it clearly is an advantage when someone is more innovation friendly. But especially when it comes to something like the identity, and especially when it comes to regulations, right? When it comes to AML and stuff, which is given gladly by law and by regulators, then they need to standardize and harmonize in the most possible way, because this is the only efficient way. And if you want to really serve Europe, and a lot of countries, I mean, we are in Germany, and I think it's no coincidence that the biggest fintechs out of Central Europe are coming from Germany, because they are coming out of the largest market. But if we want to grow, I would rather see those companies growing across Europe first, before they always need to go to the US, because investors feel like this market is more attractive because just of the size. Europe could be a huge market when you can count on whole Europe, but when the friction of you going from Germany to France is the same as you going from Germany to the US, and I'm over exaggerating a little bit, it's not exactly the same effort, but it's not as easy like to do business in France as it should be, and it could be. And especially when it comes to identity. Identity stands, especially in financial services, at the beginning of every process, right? And because of the AML legislation and others. And so I think we need harmonization, because it doesn't help us to have 800 different B2C fintechs in every country. We need 5, 10, 20 big ones in the respective areas of the respective banking fields in the European Union to build global champions, because only global champions in the end will protect us, will protect our economy, and it will protect our sovereignty and independency we all dream for.
So how do we get from, going back to the title of this chat, from this Techsavvy, which clearly finleap provides all the know-how and also the companies that you're working with, to a techready and Techsavvy, but the Techsavvy would then apply to the political scale. Is there a discrepancy? Do you feel that you're sometimes maybe not heard or not understood enough what it takes, what kind of environment it takes for the tech-ready companies that we actually want to grow and thrive?
I mean, so first of all, I think it generally, I would have said it's got better, right? So there is exchange. Joerg is taking time for a lot of things. Other people take a lot of time for things and really try to push it forward. The problem is also, I think more generally speaking, the concepts are understood. So if I compare to, like, say, 5 or 10 years ago, there were not even agreement on the concepts. So very often I would say on the concepts, there's agreement. Look at the idea, look also about the idea of a German startup fund, and look about the idea of changing the share program, the ESOP. But always then when it comes to really doing stuff, and for example, the German startup scene is very, very frustrated when it comes to incentivization of shares, so the so-called ESOP programs, right? Because the concept in the beginning and the will and the goals were right. And then when it comes to the legislation, when it comes then to nitty-gritty, and this is, I think it's a little bit typically like in every large organization, and in the end, the state is also a very large organization. You have agreement on top level, you have agreement on the goals, and then in the nitty-gritty, we destroy the ambition we have. And there we need to get better. I think it's not, is there not enough technical understanding? I would say not anymore. I think this is not the problem of concepts, I think the willingness of get things done is more the problem than really the understanding of the same concepts. And yes, maybe also I think our scene might sometimes thinks stuff is too easy. We're not in the game of elaborating with 16 federal states in Germany, and I don't know how many on the European Union. So we don't clearly want to swap jobs with Joerg here to get everyone aligned. But I think it's also our duty for a strong Europe to push on easiness and alignment when it comes to execution, and more bold moves like the crypto Verwahr license was one, like the wallet is now one. But in the end, it needs to work. And I would love to see that the Germany thinks a little bit more sometimes like a tech provider and legally as a provider of infrastructure. Because when it comes to infrastructure, it's not like the Autobahn for the cars. It's not about the cables. ID services is a clear state infrastructure. And that's why on the European ID, why cannot the ECB, the European Central Bank, give out a European ID? Why not? I mean, everyone can apply there, like in every other bank. They can run a service, and the other can accept it. They will accept it without any legislation, because if the ECB gives out a bank account, you can check into other banks with it. Then everyone would be happy, because if the ECB accept you from an AML standpoint, they don't give you a fine in the next second. And if you don't, and so there's a little bit more entrepreneurial and business infrastructure thinking. This is something I would like to see and pushed from a European level.
Joerg, interesting proposal there with the ECB. What do you say?
Well, I think, of course, we can admit that none of our legislation is going to be perfect, right? So, but just go through what we did, right? I mean, we passed the completely new program to benefit employee share ownership in startup companies. We passed something that hasn't been done for decades, namely the getting rid of VAT taxation on management fees for venture capital companies. We passed the crypto custody license. We completely revolutionized our fixed income market by allowing any issuer, any trader, any custodian, anyone who does settlements of fixed income securities to go completely on the blockchain under the safety and soundness of the German Civil Code and the German Securities Code. We spent 2 billion euros of taxpayer money to overcome liquidity issues with startup company financing through the Corona matching facility. We committed 10 billion euros of taxpayer money to build the future fund that will massively increase investments into startups in Germany. So all of these things, none of them are perfect. And I listen carefully when the startups say the employee stock option program is not perfect. However, please note, the fact that we now have legislation that everyone is focused on, that everyone is looking at, we have a law, and if we see it doesn't work and we have clear evidence that it doesn't work in fields A, B, and C, it's much easier to change an existing law than to come up with a completely new one. So I think that's the key insight, that we now have a learning system, and we now have these instruments in a huge array of fields. And if we get the wallet ID at the end of this legislative period, we'll have the next sort of building block to digitize our financial industry. And all of those will be a huge opportunity to build on, because we don't pretend like this is the end of the digital finance reform that we're doing in all areas. This is the beginning, right? And that's why we said, even if a law is imperfect, let's do it, because that gives us the opportunity to actually build learning experiences and to figure out, if company A implements it, then this goes wrong, and company B tries to hire a programmer from Google, and they can then tell us why it was successful or not. So, you build sort of a learning system where we can have the chance to make it better the next time around. And next time around doesn't have to be long, right? I mean, we just proved, by the way, that's another idea that we have, and I think will also help the fintech scene in Germany. We just passed a new legislation, in addition to the one that we passed a year and a half ago, on access to platforms, and forcing big platform providers, systemic platform providers, to open their to open their NFCs to providers of financial services, right? We learned from the feedback that we got from the ecosystem where the deficiencies were. And within 3 weeks of an existing piece of legislation, we added in Article 58 of our payments legislation, additional requirements for the big platform companies to open their NFCs and all of those things, right? So I think the fact that we're experimenting means we admit that we're imperfect, because we can't know these things as good as all of you, but we're willing to learn, we're willing to take on board the feedback, and we have a huge number of young, interested members of parliament, of people working in ministries, for people like me who are also interested. So we can take all of these inputs on board all the time and incorporate them into legislation pretty quickly. And I'm sure the incoming government, whatever color combination it'll have, will continue this process.
Well, let's take the last 5 minutes. That's about as much as we've got left to take a look at the Banking Supervision Authority, because you just say, you know, we experiment and we try things out and we're willing to learn. And BaFin is certainly being digitalized and reorganized. What does this mean for the landscape of the financial sector in Germany?
Well, I mean, digitization is very, very high on the agenda. I mean, there's obviously quite a lot of sort of corporate governance and anti-fraud elements connected to what we learned from the Wirecard case in the reform of BaFin as well. But we're using that to implement a massive digitization effort within BaFin, and to make sure that the supervisor itself digitizes itself thoroughly and uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve its ability to detect fraud and become more efficient, and also sort of learn more about how the ecosystem works, because it'll also give it the opportunity to implement better supervision policies.
Better supervision. I mean, Ramin, do you have any advice, perhaps? Because being the tech-ready and the tech-savvy one, maybe you can give them a tip or two.
Well, you know, we run or we started 4 BaFin licensed companies, so we give better the advice to stay within that. No, I think what is my biggest concern is always that because of the Wirecard debacle and maybe also a little bit the Greensill stuff, also different causes of roots, of course, and the one was clearly crime, maybe both were crime. We shouldn't overreact, and especially in the field of insurtechs, I see clear overreaction and killing innovation. The way BaFin initiated that they don't really like to see insurtechs quite publicly in the fields of, and so far the companies we started have always been founded as also of the way to profitability. But we need to keep in mind, if we want to grow, we need risk capital also in these regulated businesses. And I think when you see that eine kleine Ausschussanfrage, I think you say in German, was done regarding the revenues of the insurtechs, and why the revenues which were reported solely and discretionary to the BaFin and not publicly suddenly finds its way to the public, which was out of control, and we weren't informed before. Also, is stuff which if we would publicly announce informations we get from the BaFin, I think that would have been seen very, very critically. Now it happened the other way around. There was no excuses, which it just happened. Okay, I understand that when the Bundestag asks you something, you better report. But we need to be careful that when it comes, especially on the insurance sides, but also in all fields, that just because there was a crime, we don't totally start to panic and kill any innovation. And this is the only concern I'm having. And I think from my side, I don't want to go to prison. No one from us wants to go to prison. We all want to do good business. And but it needs two sides to change the market. A regulator who understands the challenges of a growth company and a new company, and new companies to understand the duty and the responsibility a regulator also have for the whole society and the customers.
But Joerg, you have about half a minute to respond to that, because then our time is up.
Yes, I mean, the supervisor, of course, always has the trade-off, right? I mean, on the one side, BaFin is very, very keen to promote growth and innovation. And as we see, I mean, I think if we had a very prohibitive supervisor, we wouldn't have all the success stories that we have with a lot of the unicorns coming in the fintech space. On the other side, of course, especially in insurance, the supervisor also has a obligation to safeguard consumers' money, and that, I think, in the current debate around insurtech capitalization is the key trade-off that we have to optimize, and that is a difficult, inherently difficult question that we don't have time to finalize now, because I see the lights flashing already and the next panelists. But I think we have to acknowledge that trade-off between innovation and safety and soundness of the insurance system is a very, very difficult one.
Well, thank you. I certainly also think that having politics and business, if we can just call it that way, talking to each other, if only for half an hour like that, will certainly also be beneficial in the long run. So let's do this again at some point. Joerg Kukies and Ramin Niroumand, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for letting us share your thoughts on those issues.